Welcome to our fire engineering podcast, The Command Post. I'm Chief Rick Lasky, along with my best buddy, Chief John Salka, and we've got another great show for you tonight. John, I wanted to start off our episode tonight with once again congratulating you on being inducted into the Firehouse Expo, Firehouse Magazine's Hall of Fame, and it was such a cool, I'm telling you, cool experience for Jamie and I, my wife Jamie, to fly out there to see the ceremony. It was we were so excited for you. I know your family was excited. It was great seeing your family. But what a great honor, buddy. We're so happy, excited for you. Long overdue.
It was fun. It was a nice surprise when Peter called me and told me about it, and it was fun. Going through it and going through the ceremony was a lot of fun. It was great having you and Jamie out there, and Butch and Diane came out, which was great. Of course, Dawn and the kids, and Brian and Rachel and my new granddaughter, Layla. It was great having everybody out there. It was great.
God, it was great. Jamie and Rachel hit it off. Obviously, talking cop stuff, with the little sheriff here, and with your daughter-in-law being a police officer and stuff. But God, what a beautiful baby! They did great. But it was great seeing, and I know he's one of your best friends. He's my very good friend, Butch Cobb. I love that guy. Talk about, you and I've talked about this before about the whole honor and humble thing. But talk about a humble guy that is just. And I really, truly, and I've known him for a long time, John, I really, truly lately have wrapped my arms around why so many people like him and respect him. What a great boss, what a great leader. He's another one of those guys that I would have done anything to have worked for, John.
And you know what? I met Butch a long time ago, and frankly, I'm trying to remember when. It was in the instructor realm. It was in the course of our travels and our teaching and stuff like that, but it was a long time ago. And you're right. What a modest, soft-spoken, unassuming guy. If you met him on the street, you think this guy works maybe in a candy store down the block, or he's a butcher or something. You know what I'm saying? I'm not knocking any of those other professions, but you'd never know that he was a Vietnam veteran, in battle. You'd never know that he was rose up through the ranks in Jersey City when it was wildfire over there. Made it practically to the top, chief operations, and like you said, soft-spoken, humble, easygoing. But I got to tell you, I know Butch, and I've been friends with him a long time. And Butch has had some challenges and situations at work and stuff where he had to put the foot down or lower the boom on people. And I don't want to say he doesn't hesitate to do it, because all good guys, all good bosses hesitate to do that. Nobody wants to lower the boom on anybody. But when it's necessary, it's necessary. And I'll tell you what, he was always able to do that too. So it was, you and I both know guys and gals that are bosses in the fire service and EMS that are great to be around, and they're humble and they're friendly and they're friends, and you like them. But you're like, gee, but they're a little weak at the firehouse. They're so friendly. It's hard for them to really make people. And Butch is not that guy. Butch is not, and Butch is like Mickey. Mickey Conboy.
Yeah.
We both know him. I've known Mickey for years too. Mickey's the same way. Not a friendlier, nicer, laughing guy, but man, when the chips are down, something's got to get done. Don't get in his way. Don't get in his way, or you're gonna be run over.
Well, and every time I talk to him, every time I have a chance to visit with Butch, I first of all, I learn stuff every time I talk to him. But going back 8 years to 9/11. A lot of people don't realize it's like the forgotten dispatcher, like the forgotten firefighter, Keith Roma from Fire Patrol Number 2, who was killed on 9/11. We forget about him, the forgotten firefighter. And then the same, that Jersey City is the only, I think what you told me, the only city that has the mutual aid with the Port Authority, if you will, because of the first February 26, 1993 World Trade Center bombing, where they respond a chief to your command post in New York City to work, because you guys have such a close working relationship. And the fact that, you go to the memorial, the two fountains, and you'll see, a Jersey City, fire dispatcher's name, Jersey City, FD, FD Jersey City, actually.
And it's amazing how many guys from the FDNY, guys that were there day one and worked for days and weeks there and into the job and everything else. It was just one of those facts that sort of just slipped away. And I must tell you, and you and I have talked about this before, 9/11. There are literally tens of thousands of stories. Every single guy and gal and firefighter and EMS worker and volunteer and police officer and everybody that was there had a different experience. It wasn't like 5 guys came in and did something and they all tell you the same story from a different perspective. Every single person that was there did something that somebody else didn't do or didn't see. And I'm still amazed. It's coming up on 20 years, and I see guys from the job that I've known my whole career that either I did or didn't know they were at 9/11. And all of a sudden this topic comes up or a discussion comes up, and all of a sudden I'm like, what? Where were you on 9/11? And all of a sudden like, yeah, I came in from the Rock. I was at the Rock. I was with a couple of guys, and all of a sudden I'm hearing a story that I never heard, and that will never end. That I don't think that's ever going to end. There'll always be stories from people. I hear stories when I do seminars. Guy came up to me, a volunteer firefighter, said, "Oh, I'm a survivor from 9/11." I'm thinking to myself, "Are you on the job?" He said, No. I worked for Merrill Lynch. I was up in the building, and then he started to tell me the story how he was up there when the plane hit the one tower, and he packed his stuff up and left, and there's thousands of stories of civilians that made it out that day, and when they left, and who they dragged with them, and where they went, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, and Butch being right there. I mean, and the story he told about, after the collapse, after witnessing everything he did and assisting, and when a group of your guys come out and say, "Hey, Chief, we need some help with this," and he pointed his house, says, "I'm Jersey City." He goes, "No, not today. Not today. You got that gold front piece on. You take charge of this."
We need some direction. Yeah.
And then he had the one lieutenant that was really banged up bad, that didn't want to go to medical. I mean, banged up bad. And they said, he goes, "Look, I'm because Butch doesn't want to overstep. He knows, where his place is, if you will, in different jurisdictions." And one of your guys said, "No, Chief, you need to go be a boss, and you need to tell him right now. He won't know. You need to tell him, look." And he says, "I went over and had a little discussion." This lieutenant kept disagreeing. I finally said, "Look, I'm not asking. That's an order. You need to go get." And he got up and went himself. He goes, he was banged up big time, but in that particular situation, it just people with their thoughts and their processes and everything else are all over the place. And then he responded back, and then they told him, when later on his chief told him, "You need to go back over." He said, "I can't," and he had to explain why. And later on, his boss understood why. But here's another thing that I never realized, that Joe Angelini, their air truck that Jersey City sent over there, their mass truck, Joe Angelini, most senior, I think he was retired, whatever, came back looking for his son, Rescue One guys.
Yeah, his son was in Fort Truck.
Fort Truck. Actually, the guy, he asked the air truck guy, "Do you have a set of bunker gear?" And he gave him his Jersey City gear. And I never knew that. I never found, there's just so many stories, John, that are just, and then, just being able to, first of all, being able to visit with Butch was just, golly, at dinner, I'm hanging on every word he says. The guy said, what a great guy. And to our listeners, if you've never had opportunity if you ever are at a program, you're at a seminar, and you see, Chief Butch Cobb is one of the speakers, do what you can to sit through his program, and do what you can to have a conversation with the guy, because he's just incredible. Then going to dinner with you and Butch and your family, being able to visit at dinner also with retired District Chief of Worcester, Mike McNamee, another one of my heroes. And John, first off, I guess for a topic maybe for this show, why don't we call Great Leaders Make Tough Decisions? Because you talked about Butch already having to come down sometimes on people when he needed to, like all bosses have to. Some people don't do that. Mike McNamee, oh my God, if that's not a red blinking example of making tough decisions, bosses make it tough. For our visitors, walk us back to Worcester, because even the symposium you did. But let's talk about that real quick, John.
Sure. And I want to comment on obviously what you just said as well. That's like the definition of bravery. What McNamee did that night, and it wasn't physical bravery on his personal part, but it was bravery, to make a decision. He had to step up and make a decision that he knew right then and right there was going to be unpopular, and it was even going to be hard for him to back it up. But as a matter of fact, that's why Mike is the one that presents the award. It's the Mike
The
McNamee
Valor. Yeah.
Medal of Valor, because they named it after him, not because he was brave and he went into a fire and he risked his own personal life and safety, but because he had the gumption and the guts and the bravery to say that's it. Nobody else is going in there, and I think it's great, as you saw when they show that little lead in to the actual presentation of the award to the winner. They show a little lead in of Mike being interviewed about that day, and he said one of the hardest decisions, but one of the clearest decisions he ever made in his life. He said there was no debate in my mind. He said I knew what I had to do. So really great. And of course, Mike McNamee is another example of a guy, a firefighter, a chief that we're all have relationships with now because of the tragedy in Worcester. If the tragedy in Worcester had never happened, we wouldn't know him. He wouldn't be on that stage. He wouldn't be part of the Firehouse family and giving away that award. It wouldn't be named after him. So many things have developed since then. And of course, for our listeners, it is 20 years. As a matter of fact, it's 20 years coming right up in the next
Seems
month.
like yesterday. Seems like yesterday.
Yep. That Worcester lost 6 firefighters in the cold storage warehouse. It was a tragic fire in a building that they had pegged as trouble. As we got to know the guys after the event, of course, they said we used to drive past that place and say, "Oh my God, let's hope we never get that fire." And of course, one night they did. Mike was the district chief on duty. He was the battalion chief equivalent, and how the whole story unfolded. Of course, they ended up losing 6 people, 6 firefighters. Worcester's not a small department, but it's not gigantic. They knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody, and Mike had to pull a pin. Mike had to say, "That's it. 6 guys are gone, and nobody else is going in there." And he had some physical. Had to practically physically stand in the doorway.
John, didn't he say he actually braced himself?
Yep.
He actually, with his arms, like dug his feet into the door jamb and his hands, and had to physically. Guys were physically grabbing.
We're in there. Our guys are in there. He said, "We're going outside. We're going defensive." And he said it was a very, very trying moment. But certainly Mike. It's been recognized by everyone that Mike did the right thing that night. If 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more guys had gone in, surely they would have perished as well. So he certainly saved lives. God knows how many. And then we become friends with him. Obviously, it brings back Butch again, because Butch was the one that made the contact with them. They went up there. I remember being on duty the night it happened in the 18th Battalion. I had my pager, and I was getting this page from Worcester, Massachusetts. Where's that? Holy cow, a bunch of guys missing and Maydays and stuff like that. And it turns out they started reaching out for help right away, and Butch went up and organized some classes for them, just for them, personal classes for them, training for them. And then it turned into a big seminar idea that they said, let's do a big seminar, invite the world, and raise some money and build a monument for our guys. And that's what they started doing. And that went on for several years. And guys like Ray Downey and myself and John Norman and a whole crew of guys, Mickey Conboy, obviously Butch, Mike Smith. A lot of guys went up there and donated their time for a couple of years and did big seminars with big audiences, and all the money went into a fund that eventually was used for the beautiful memorial that they built for those guys. And we all became friends. They stopped doing it after 6 years. I'm not quite sure the exact conditions that it was under, but 6 years was like enough, And it turns out it was 6 guys, and they did 6 seminars. So, and then we just kept meeting after that. We said, what, we're not doing seminars anymore. We're not seeing each other. Let's get together. And we started an annual get-together. And every single year we meet in the first week in December sometime. And either we all go up to Worcester and spend the day there and the night and out to dinner and then go home the next day, or a group of them, 7 or 8 of them that we all became friends with, come down here to New York and meet with all of us, and we do the same thing. So this is year 20. This is the anniversary. Yep.
Well, and what a great group of guys. I remember meeting a bunch of them when they came up for your last day in the firehouse in the Bronx.
That's right. You were there for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, they drove up for that, and
down. They drove down.
Or I'm sorry, drove down. Golly, I get that screwed up all the time. It's kind of Skip Coleman, our buddy Skip, retired district chief from Toledo, Ohio, used to harass me being from Chicago. Because I used to say up by you. Didn't matter if I was in Chicago, you were down in Texas. I was up by you. He goes, and he used to go, how is everybody up by you with you? I said, well, I don't know. It's just something I grew up saying. But you just mentioned a handful of names. And obviously, I think, we already decided right in the middle of the show, because you and I never know what we're going to half the time we're going to talk about. Great leaders make tough decisions. Mickey Conboy, there's another guy that great boss, great rescue boss at the FDNY. Here's another guy that had to make a tough decision, self-decision about sharing his mask. Legendary, famous. On what did he say at your son James's wedding? I remember telling the story when you sat down with us, and he's like, "Yeah, I was supposed to be off." And my wife's at work, and her friend goes, "Hey, come here on the news. We have the news. There's some crazy New York City firefighter, with this lady at a window." And that's him. He rappelled down to her, right? And then inside and waiting for the crews, had to share his air. That's a I guess it will be tough decision to make. But you talked about Mike, Chief McNamee. Oh my God. If that's not the definition of courage, like you said, and looking in your firefighters' eyes, you know what I'm saying? Oh, how hard that had to be, and we've got people we know that are chief officers or company officers that get shy about making like the easy decisions, let alone something like that. And I think about how many times they happened in the John Nance from Columbus, Ohio, where John Nance was taken for us like a month before his retirement, fell in the basement, where finally a boss outside said nobody else is going in. And that was a long time ago. How many, I start thinking about how many fatalities maybe would have been averted if a good boss, a good, strong boss had said, no. You've always said it in class, the toughest word to say in the firehouse as a boss is no.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's in the firehouse.
I mean, these are dramatic stories, some of them that we've told already, but they're not all dramatic. Some of them are as simple as, and for our listeners, if you have been company officers or acted up or whatever, sometimes it's as simple as you're responding in the apparatus, you're sitting up in the right front seat, and the guy that's driving is driving a little too fast, or maybe using his hand on the horn too much instead of keeping on the steering wheel. And sometimes it's like, hey, Willie, Billy, Tommy, Joe, slow down, man. We're going to get there. We're second due engine. That in itself is hard to do, because I know the first couple of times I did that as a young, new officer, it was difficult because you feel like you're sort of cutting them short. You feel like you're sort of yelling at them. And it doesn't have to be a yell. It could just be, hey, come on, slow down, man. But it's still difficult. And you know what it is, particularly in the fire service. I used to say, and I don't really mean it's easy to be a boss or easier to be a boss in the police than it is in the fire. But the cops don't live with each other, eat with each other, shop with each other, watch a ball game around a kitchen table with a cup of coffee for 2 hours together. The cops don't do that. They do socialize and stuff when they're off duty, or maybe a little bit in the fire, in the precincts and stuff. But the cops' social atmosphere, the culture is a little different than the culture in the fire service. So it's hard. You could be sitting at the kitchen table having a great lunch cooked by the 3 firefighters that are on the rig with you. Then you might have a card game or just a great discussion about the picnic last week. Then you might watch a sports event on TV for an hour. Then you get a run. And suddenly the guy that was sitting next to you having fun, laughing, cooking your lunch, suddenly he's driving too fast and you got to sort of raise your voice at him. It's just an uncomfortable situation. However, you and I and Butch and Mickey and everybody else who does this for a living or do it regularly, even volunteers, right? After you do it a couple of times, it's not that hard. And suddenly you realize what your role is and that it's important to do. And we say all the time, you're not in the front seat to beep the horn, right? Sometimes you got to do it. And if you're not comfortable doing that, as I and you have said many times, then sit in the back. Sit in the crew compartment with the rest of the firefighters and pull hose and break windows. If you want to sit in the front, you better know some days are going to be uncomfortable,
And I think it's, as tough and as hard and as courageous as Chief McNamee, Mike was, and we talk about those different people, not to take anything away from that, because it's an incredible story. But a lot of what we do, John, on the fire ground or at an accident scene, I think it's a lot easier sometimes, when we're talking about managing the consequence of other people's actions as bosses, to say, slow down, put your seatbelt on, put your seatbelt back on, put your face piece on, put your face piece back on, get a backer, get out, get in, whatever. Sometimes I think it's I think it's a lot easier to talk about that stuff, sometimes we'll get to that in a second, than it is, in the firehouse, like you said, you just said it. You set it up perfectly where it's like, 1 minute we're yucking it up, we're talking and telling stories and all that stuff and so on and so forth. And I still say it. I know it's television, and you being a big TV star from Chicago Fire, you know what I'm talking about. But being able to help Travolta, John Travolta, a little bit with Ladder 49 on the phone, we talked a bunch of times, and not just the Mayday stuff, not just the flag being still up, it should be at half mast, and not the whole love for the job thing, but his ability to play a role. I know he's an actor, but oh my God, I wish I could have had 50 of them as company officers and bosses, that he knew how to strike a balance. He knew how to goof. He knew how to participate. He was like that strong uncle, and then he knew how to be the boss. He knew how to separate the two. And I think that, we've talked about John, our company officer came a lot of times, that so many people have a hard time jumping from buddy to boss. They have such a hard time. Again, and I do this whole, you and I both believe in this whole brother-sister thing more than most people, but I think to a fault sometimes, that whole brotherhood thing, again, and there's a her in our brotherhood, it actually hurts us. I think as you get to be a captain, when you get to be a BC, there's still some little shots, a little sparks of that going on, but you've been a boss for a while. You've said that before. You're just adjusting maybe tasks, not necessarily the role, if you will, but making that jump from firefighter driver to lieutenant or captain, whatever that first jump is. Some places don't have lieutenants.
Yep.
John, let's talk about that for a second, that buddy to boss. I think that's the hardest adjustment for a lot of people to make, is now, like you said, you're not up there just right in the front seat. You got to make some decisions. It ain't just about whether we're having steak or fish tonight. It's some, and it's not even fireground stuff. It's stuff going on in the firehouse.
Oh, a lot of it is. A lot of it is just not casual, but not emergency stuff, but still important stuff that's happening. Decisions have to be made about training, about when we're going out, what we're doing. Is everybody wearing the right uniform? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Building inspection and things like that. Every decision you make, is going to have some impact on the folks that work for you.
Well, let me interrupt you for 1 second. Let me interrupt you. You mentioned something. I don't want to lose this before I forget it. You talked about being in a uniform of the day. All right, and neither one of us are the uniform police, but we both understand that the uniform, the logo, represents something pretty special, a pretty proud tradition, your department, your heritage. You and I've talked about this before, about if they're not doing one thing right, what else they're not doing right. If your firefighters, if you're the captain or lieutenant, are constantly not in the uniform of the day, and I'm not saying they're wearing their FR pants and their day boots, and they're wearing their maybe fire department T-shirt. Okay, if that's acceptable. I'm talking flip flops and gym shorts and a T-shirt from the Yankees or from the Chicago Bears. That kind of thing. That if they're doing that, my thing is, what else are they not checking the rig? Are they late checking the rig? If they're late putting their uniform on, right? I'm sure they don't have their gear ready. I'm sure they don't have their rig ready. I'm sure they're not ready. I think it's kind of like they're people who are slobs are generally sloppy at everything they do, and people who are OCD whatever. Well, the same job. Not being a uniform today, I think, is a big deal.
And I'll tell you what, we can use uniform of the day as an example, but it's just one example. You could be coming in on time. It could be turning out quickly for runs or whatever it is. But for any young officers that are listening, or guys that are going to be young officers, or maybe guys that are young or not so young and maybe have had similar situations, most of this gets solved. And again, it's not always easy to do, but most of this gets solved by officers making a decision, maybe talking to some of their fellow officers, maybe talking to some of their friends that are officers elsewhere, and stepping up and making a decision. You know what? I'm going to say something. And once you say something, you may get a little pushback. You may have a conversation. You may not get a card game that night or quite so many jokes or smiles on the way back from the next run. But my point is, firefighters generally do comply with whatever the rules are if you hold them to it, if you hold their feet to the fire. If you let them wear flip-flops, if you let them wear their, T-shirt from the Little League, and rather than a fire department T-shirt on duty. Oh, Lieutenant, it's okay. I'll put the regular shirt on if a chief comes or if we go out. No. I want you to have a shirt on all day long, or I want you to wear the right clothes all day long. Or put collar pins on. I don't want to figure out if you're a lieutenant or a captain. Again, the particular issue doesn't matter, but how you handle it is what matters. And if you're a young officer or even an old officer, maybe hasn't got a handle on this, if you insist, I mean, I hate to say if you give them an order, but let's just say if you insist, if you say, no, here's what we're going to do, fellas, okay? There's a new sheriff in town. I don't know what the old lieutenant did here, but he's promoted now, or he retired now, and I'm here, and I love this place, and you guys are great, but here's what I want done. Like I said, you may have a little break-in period there, but if you insist, they will do it. If you lead, they will follow. And that may not be all smiles and giggling about it, but I've been there a couple of times in different groups of firefighters in different places. You and I have both heard stories from guys around the country that once you wade into it a little bit, once you really make the decision you want it done, you know what? Most of the time, things work out just fine.
Well, and don't you agree, John? We've talked about this plenty of times, just having conversations that firefighters want to be led. I truly, even the loudest mouth wants to be led the most, but firefighters, they absolutely need to have SOPs, SOGs, rules and regulations, labor contracts, volunteer rules and charters. Give them the entire gigantic playbook and then leave them the hell alone. Let them do their jobs and just kind of coach them and lead them along the way and all that stuff. They want to be led. They want to know where the speed limit signs are and everything else. They want someone who's willing to tell them, hey, stop this. Or, earlier in my career, I've talked about Chief Bob Rubel in Bedford Park, a block from Midway Airport on the west side of Chicago, saved my career because he cared enough about me to call me in his office. I use this example of pride and ownership all the time. He called me in his office, and told me to close the door and proceeded to yell and holler at me in a loud, booming voice, told me I'm throwing away my career, my life, my family, and then kicked me out. And I've always asked people, you ever have one of those butt chewing so bad that, your ears get real hot, you feel like you're going to cry? And about a week later, John, he called me back in the office and he said, come on in, kid, close the door. And he proceeded to yell at me again. And he told me later it's because I'm half Italian, half Polish. And he had to attack the Italian side and the Polish side to make his point. But anyway, all kidding aside, the second time he kicked me out of the office, I realized he was right. And I realized he was right. And what he'd been trying to tell me, his message was right on. And I remember, John, the year he retired, I've told this story a bunch of times, and like I said, Pride and Ownership, I sent him a 5-page letter. It took me 2 weeks to write it because I kept revising it because thank you wasn't good enough. I wrote him a 5-page letter. And first of all, he wrote me one damn paragraph. That's not fair. I write you 5 pages, he writes me 1 paragraph. But anyway, John, I put in there, I start off by saying, I said, I know you probably won't agree with this because I know the kind of boss he is. He's humble. He's a great boss, but humble, one of those truly people that's just humble and loved the job and loved his guys. I told him, I said, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for you. I wouldn't be in the fire service. I don't know what I'd be doing, but I know I would not be in the fire service today if you had done what you did. You stuck your neck out for me. You weren't some simpy, whiny ass, weak fire chief that would rather see his guys walk off the pier and fall off into oblivion than help them. I said, you stuck your neck out for me. You yelled at me. You hollered at me. You cursed me. You called me names and you called me stupid. And I told him, John, I said, I'm indebted to you. Thank you isn't good enough. And I've tried, and I always tell people, I wrote a 5-page one paragraph, and in the paragraph, the first line was, Rick, glad to hear everything worked okay for you. I'm like, oh, thanks a lot, Chief, for that vote of confidence. The last line was, give everybody home a hug for me. In the middle, all he said was, Rick, all I expect when you become a chief one day you will, that you take care of another good young firefighter like I did you. Some people are worth saving. And I've tried to live that way as a boss, as a leader, and you know it. I've met a ton of your guys that have worked with you for you. I mentioned Tom Freeman on a bunch of our shows before. Chief Tom Freeman, another Southsider. Tom used to say, Rick, I'd rather be respected than liked as a bonus. As a boss, right? How many times you ever heard we got the greatest judges? And I loved my chiefs too. Didn't mean I didn't get chewed out once in a while for doing something stupid or for in this case saving my career. getting it. Like my cousin Vinny, I could fight you for the $200, or I could get my ass kicked. I could use a good ass kicking, and I could use a good ass kicking, and he saved my career. So sometimes, John, the tough decisions to make, and you mentioned already, are not the ones crawling a hallway or stand on the street at a fire. It's in the damn firehouse, right?
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you for sure that some of the toughest days and nights and decisions and anxieties that I've had was sitting up in the office thinking about something, making a decision on the apparatus floor, quickly saying something or not saying something. And I know I've told this story in our classes before. I don't know if I've ever told it on one of our radio shows or not, but like I remember being a firefighter, and everybody to some degree, not everybody, but if you're ever a loudmouth, you're probably the loudest mouth when you're a firefighter. Firefighters have the freedom to say what they want to say in a firehouse. We laugh about that all the time, about how it's sort of a no holds barred arena, the firehouse. You can sort of almost say anything you want, and as long as it doesn't go outside the walls, we all laugh and giggle, and politically correct isn't necessarily the rule of the day. And then I made lieutenant. Now, lieutenant is it's a simple rank. It's just one rank above firefighter. You're riding in the front seat. You're still all eating together and going to runs together and everything else. But I still felt the need to sort of, abbreviate my comments a little bit, not be quite as pointed or sarcastic or maybe even, not nasty. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I'm riding in the front seat, and then you start to meet new people. Probies come in. Now they've never known you as a firefighter. They just knew you as a lieutenant. So you find your new role, and sitting at the lunch table, you might join in on some funny comments that are being said, but you try and abbreviate a little bit. Then you make captain. On my fire department, I have lieutenants and captains, 2 ranks as company officers. And as a captain, there's only one captain in the whole company, the company commander. You supervise actually other officers, right? You can be an acting battalion chief now and then. And I think I sort of slowed down a little bit more. And I said, I'm the captain now here. I just can't jump in on every little sarcastic conversation on the kitchen table and, about a guy that was drinking last night and came stumbling in, or the guy's antics at the company party the night before with his new girlfriend or whatever. And so I greatly greatly limited my participation in those jam sessions. And then I made battalion chief, and it was pretty much over. Now I'm 2 or 3 ranks above everybody. I certainly wasn't going to get involved in saying things about firefighters and joining in the conversation, when they're busting a guy's chops about doing something or missing a run or whatever. I ended up just sitting there thinking about God. Well, I certainly had good answers for them. I had more stuff ready to say than most of them did probably, but I didn't, because then I was a battalion chief. Nothing special, no royalty or anything. I just didn't feel it was right to jump in and take part in the little bashing session of the guy at the end of the table who was down and out that day. And it's not damaging or nasty bashing. It's all fun and laughing, but still, I didn't want to be part of it. I said, you know what? It's better if I just sit here and giggle and watch and not take part in that thing. And it worked out well for me. For me, everybody does things a little bit differently, and it worked out well for me. And I think that's probably some good advice if you're wondering, gee, I'm getting promoted soon, or I'm getting promoted again. Gee, should I change? Should I stay the same? And everybody is constantly changing. And as you go up through the ranks, I think that some change is inevitable and actually sort of mandatory.
Well, and you're right. And that's making that leap, from buddy to boss you just talked about, transcending, or climbing that ladder, if you will, to where you get to a point in fire service maturity wise, not on a boo-boo, but fire service maturity, where you can't be the same Rick or John that you were. I thank God every day as I progressed, I stopped being the Rick I was as a young firefighter. I'm like, and I also thank God I had a great boss named Lieutenant Bill Allen, one of my heroes, that not only took care of me and corrected me and led me and coached me and slapped me and pushed me when I needed it and everything else, but straightened my ass out, because, oh my God, and again, making those decisions, like you said earlier, I want to go back to one thing you said about they may not be as popular. And both you and I tell stories all the time about different, scenarios where you've had to make those tough decisions. And it's not something that golly, I've left City Hall, John, going, how in the hell am I going to tell the guy? How am I going to, how am I going to tell the guys this? This is going to go over like a fart in a telephone booth, man. I'm telling you, and this is going to be, And I used to have to drive around for about 45 minutes going, how am I going to do this? You know, because you and I we've prided ourselves on one very important point that we've been able to live up to later on in our careers, and that is you never bitch down. And I can't, you know, the worst thing I can do when it's a tough decision to make is go back and throw crap at someone else. You know what I'm saying? Or try to blame the boss. You know, we're going to do. We've got another old school presentation coming up on loyalty, but loyalty up as much as you need loyalty down to your troops, you need loyalty up to your bosses, and that means, you know, going out and having to explain tough decisions, you know, that weren't even made in your office. They were made at City Hall or in your place. If, you know, the commissioner's office said, no more of this or whatever this, told the chief of department came out. And how many times down in your career, I know I've got my head is swarming with thoughts right now of how many times did you go, what in God's name are they doing this for?
Right.
It's almost like one of your guys in the Chief Ray Downey tribute. I remember I watched that video all the time. I found it, by the way, for our class. And he says, you know, sometimes Chief Downey would throw an order out or two, and you go, why does he want to do that? Why does it? And 20 minutes later, that order would come into play, you know, and you go, oh, that's why. Well, I had one of my captains come down, John, in my office, sit down, and he goes, okay, it's been 10 years. I finally get it. And I went, finally get it. I was actually happy while he goes, you know, yeah, I finally get it. And some people, I think it takes longer for them to realize what it is, what their it is, that whole you know, the whole act your wage thing than it does others, right?
And I've experienced that too, and I'm sure you have as well. I've experienced where I was the one that was disagreeing with what was being said, being told something by one of my bosses. And I was a boss, but I was a junior boss, maybe a company officer. And I'm being told something by a chief about something he saw or heard. And I'm like, what? Yeah, that's the way it's going to be. And here's how I want it done. And here's what I don't want you to do anymore. And I'm like, all right, man. You know, and I'm disagreeing in my head. I'm saying, I don't know what this is about, but he's the boss, and I'm his lieutenant, I'm his captain. And I went and delivered the news, and I stopped doing whatever it was he asked me to stop doing, or started doing whatever he asked me to start doing. And then sometimes, months or even years later, I'm realizing, you know what, he was right. All of a sudden, I revisit that mentally and say, you know what I'm going through right now, what I'm telling somebody to do is what he was telling me to do. Suddenly, you realize it. 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, that lesson that he gave me, that I sort of walked away shaking my head, thinking, what is he, out of his mind? Suddenly, I'm giving somebody the same message 5 years later in a different office, in a different firehouse, and I realized that was valid, that was true, and I sort of just, now listen, to my credit and to your credit, I walked away, and I was a good soldier, and I did what I was told, and I stopped doing what he didn't want me to keep doing, and that's the way it went, and I disagreed with it, but I put it in my back pocket, and I moved forward. And sometimes that's what you have to do, you know, because, you know, you got a boss, you got a chief if you're a captain, you got a captain if you're a lieutenant, whatever it might be. If you're a firefighter, you have a company officer. When people tell you what to do, when officers give you an order, when officers give you a direction, sometimes when officers give you advice, you really should heed it, because most people are not going to bother spending their time with you if it's wrong, if it's incorrect, or if they really didn't care. So, you know, sometimes, like we always say, do you want to die on that hill?
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to figure out which situations you want to argue over. And I'm not saying you should always just throw the towel in. Most good bosses will say, do you agree or disagree, John? And I'll say, well, I disagree. And you'll have a little debate, and then it'll still be over, and you'll still comply with what they wanted to do. Sometimes you just say, you know what, I'm not even going to argue this one. I'm just going to roll along, because there's enough stuff happening around here that I want to save my ammunition for, you know, and I'm not going to argue about collar pins today, you know?
Well, and exactly. One thing I want to add to one of the points you made was, and like a little follow up to it, I guess, is once you've realized, to our listeners, once you've realized that maybe something you were told by a boss or a previous boss, now all of a sudden it makes sense. Like you say, 2 days later, 2 hours later, 2 years later, 10 years later, you know, and I would just throw this out there, John, to our listeners, pick up the phone and tell them. Because there's times, I'll be honest with you, I'm human. There's times I've doubted myself, not my values, not like, you know, we all know when you make a decision based on what your values, what is the right decision to make, you know, that kind of stuff. I'm not, you know, but once in a while I'm like, yeah, oh God, was I too hard? Did I lean on too much? You know, at what point golly. And then you get someone who sits down and says, I finally get it. You were right all along. And I'm telling you, folks, if you ever get to that point where you realize maybe what you were arguing wasn't the right thing, or I don't mean illegal, but the right thing, and that the boss was right. Next time you see him, go, hey, remember about 2 years ago when you were like riding my ass about this? And I'm gonna tell you, I walked away going, you're out of your mind, but I did it because I'm loyal to you, because you're the boss. Boss, you were right on, man. You were right on. You were right there. And there are things I sit back and think about my career, John, that I'm like, I thought some of my bosses were just, I thought they were admin junkies and just loyal to City Hall and all that. And I didn't realize they were just trying to keep me out of crap and keep me on the straight and narrow and run a fire department and take care of people and get them the stuff they needed, the people they needed, the firehouse they need to keep them safe and to run good jobs and to do, be a good boss. How many times have you and I said it? You could be the acting, you're chief of your department right now. You could be an acting chief all you want. You could be an acting lieutenant all you want. Right? I have a whole chapter in Pride and Ownership called Changing Shirts, the promotion. You could be an acting officer for 10 years. A great job for you. Hallelujah. You pin those collar pins on, everything changes. And especially as a chief. And I told you, we both love Tim Tittle. Tim's the chief of Louisville. Tim was my number 2 chief for like 12 years. Tim Tittle defines loyalty. He defines loyalty. And I remember telling Tim, we're doing that whole leadership transitional thing in Louisville, Texas. I said, there's going to be times you're going to want to pick up the phone and you're going to go, come here, and I need to punch you right in the nose because you didn't tell me this stuff. And John, I swear to God, hand to God, about a month and a half after I left, he called me and said, how's it going, buddy? He goes, I want to punch you right in the nose. He goes, you didn't tell me. I got a guy that wants me to promote him off a dead driver engineers list. I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do it. I mean, like, I can't promote you over. He says, and he's grieving me because he thinks, and some of the other stuff, he goes, oh my God. I went, yeah. It's Calvin Allison. You heard me talk about Calvin, my union officer in Louisville for a long time, captain. 3 sons are great firefighters. We've had Andy before on our show. Andy, he's on medical. Calvin retired to be a chief of a department. And I remember Calvin about a couple months, John, into being the chief, sat down in my office and closed the door. And I'm like, oh, this is a good. He closed the door and he got a little emotional. He says, for years I thought you were just kind of running your mouth about some things, Chief. I just was like, all right. He goes, damn. He goes, I told my guys this morning I should be trying to hire more people and build you new firehouses, but I can't because you brought a gun to work and you did this and you did that. He goes, I'm spending all my time fixing crap that you guys are doing instead of getting you the things you need. And some of these decisions, I go, yeah, it's not easy being the boss, is it? I mean, you how many times in class have you said, any ship's captain can sail a ship on a calm sea, but the good ones can sail, and get you through the rough seas, right?
Right. Absolutely. And and a lot of times as firefighters or even junior officers, sometimes you're not privy to the things that are going on in the chief's office and the things that they're handling and taking care of and doing the right thing on. And sometimes you don't even know about it. Sometimes you go to a guy's retirement party or his last shift and guys are telling you, yeah, I remember a couple of years ago when his chief was working one night, I was a captain. I screwed up and I did this, and man, he took care of me. He watched out for me, and he was a good boss. I was a good captain too, but I messed up on it. And you said, he did that for you? He said, yeah. And sometimes you don't even realize some of the bosses that you got, some of the the straight shooters. You know what I'm saying? Guys that are pretty straight, and you think, oh, he would never. And sometimes you find out, yeah, you know what they do? They do take care of people, and they do know what's right to do, and they do have values, and they do take care of the people that deserve to be taken care of.
And how many times, John, have you and I been sitting around and we've been bragging and going on about our mentors, the people that, because every one of us in this fire service has gotten to where we're at because of other people, that have gotten us there. But how many bosses later on, when you went and sat down with them and you said, and you brought that to their attention, they just kind of sat back and they smiled at you, kind of that acknowledgement, not a I told you so look, kind of like a,
right.
Yeah, I'm glad you realized, because it's again, it's one thing to say time to get out, right? You've talked about it. Sometimes as a battalion chief, you had to go stand in the hose because your guys were so good at getting after the fire. So, I mean, you had some freaking incredible firefighters in the 18th Battalion everywhere, but especially there, where you had to stand a hose and they're like, I'll just pick an engine, not the, I'll just say 45, back out, 10-4 chief. All right. 45, I said, back out. 10-4, you right away. And every time you said back out, the hose went in 5 more feet to where you finally stood on the hose. And some guy, chief, what are you doing? He goes, I told you to get out.
Right.
No,
Right.
You remember being in a building and some boss, Chief Joe D, probably telling you, Salka, out now. And you're like, what the hell is he talking about? And then you get out there and you go, so where did all this fire come from? Because we're inside.
Yep.
And good bosses have that I think it's kind of a sense, kind of a something inside, maybe a gut feeling of when to make some of those decisions and when to really lean on you. But I think some of the time to get out, tell somebody wear seatbelts and stuff like that. How about response readiness? We've talked about that. Let's talk about, the guys that are slow to the rig and slow to get out of bed and slow to, and you said it on one of our old school shows about it's not their seconds, but, being able to sit down and tell someone, look, dude, you're not making it. You better sleep with your clothes. If you can't get out of bed quicker, to sleep with your damn clothes on. If you can't make the rig, we've got serious issues because those people out there are counting on us. I mean, stuff like that, John, that and firehouse conduct and how we treat each other, those are the unpleasantries that a lot of bosses, you've talked about our idol Colin Powell how many times, never walk past a mistake. I think a lot of those shy, timid officers I talked about earlier, they put the blinders on. They'd rather, and even some of it's small, they walk past the smaller stuff even, which festers and becomes bigger things because they're just not good with confrontations,
And you know what else really was well? And you mentioned Colin Powell, and he's obviously one of the guys that we both look up to, and his books are fantastic, and the lessons that he presents in them. And that whole never walk past a mistake thing that he wrote, it's a chapter in one of his books, and I ended up writing an article on that of that title, never walk past a mistake, and gave him the full credit for it. And he identified like 5 separate valid reasons why you should never walk past a mistake. You know what I'm saying? And one was better than the other. And when you start to spell stuff like that out, sometimes it takes a guy who's a young officer he doesn't feel comfortable, nitpicking. Every time I see something, if I bring it up every time I see something, guys are going to be like, oh, you're picking on another thing. Every time we do something, you pick on. And if you suddenly realize from listening to a guy like Colin Powell that there are some great positive reasons to never walk past a mistake, that can actually change the guy's opinion on it. It can change his way that he handles stuff like that. So sometimes explaining that to your junior officers, sometimes explaining that to new officers and saying, here's why officers do that. They don't do it to break chops. They don't do it to embarrass somebody. They do it to make the operation better and to show that they, it demonstrates that they can recognize a mistake, that they care enough about the company that they're going to say, hey, let's get this hose packed right here. It looks a little funky. So yeah, sometimes not walking past a mistake, sometimes citing things that are being done wrong or half wrong or slightly wrong or too slowly or too quickly. There's a reason for it because the work that we do is not, like you said, we're not delivering newspapers or baking bread. We're delivering emergency services to people, and we like to try and do it as closely to perfect as possible, obviously.
Well, yeah, and that goes back to training. We said this hundreds of times, to those that don't want to spend the time, make that, again, we're talking about great leaders make tough decisions. Sometimes that tough decision is, guys, I know you don't feel like it, but let's go. We got to train. And we've said how many times, why would you not want to train your people for a job that could kill them? This is not, like you said, making sandwiches or baking bread, stuff like that. And I think part of that, John, is as we kind of look towards, finishing this episode up of the command post, is I think a lot of young firefighters, don't get it yet. God bless them. Good young men and women. Thank God we're hiring the great men and women we're hiring nowadays, and there's a ton of them. Screw that whole generational thing. There's all walks of life that are doing great things in the fire service. It's easy to pay attention to the 1 or 2 knuckleheads out there. We forget the hundreds of thousands of great firefighters that are out there doing great stuff. But there's a lot of bosses that need to realize that it's business, not personal. And, when you start making decisions based on what's personal, on emotions, so we've said this before, making decisions based what's solely in your heart, you're no longer an objective leader, you're a subjective leader, because now you're letting your emotions, your feelings interfere with making good decisions. And I've told you've heard me say this a bunch of times, never ever make a decision based solely on what's in your heart. Use your heart as your guide. Your heart is your moral compass. Your chest will tell you when you're doing something wrong, you know it. Use your head for common sense and couple the two together and make those good decisions, as simple as they may be, or concerning small issues, all the way up to the big ones and back down again, because every single one of them is going to affect your crew, your department, your ability to serve the public, because that's why we're there. It's going to keep people alive. They're going to wear their seatbelts. They're going to put their face pieces on at the right time. They're going to put them back on when they should have had them on. They're going to get a backup person. They're going to control. They're going to look up. They're going to look up. Timmy Oak took another great couple pictures of a couple guys in Chicago coming up to still in box. John, I always love this. Instead of heads down, heads up, like your guys. I told you, I've never taken a picture or video in New York City where your guys did step off the rig, even the pro, and they're looking up. They're looking up at the building. They're not looking down. They're looking up at what they've got ahead of them. Good bosses look ahead of them. Good bosses, anybody can handle what's going on right in front of them. But the good, great bosses make the tough decisions that have long range, goals, long range impacting, scenarios. Like you said before, anybody can just make an easy decision. How about making a tough one, stepping up and taking care of your people? I think that kills off a lot of the crap in the firehouse, John, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And firefighters know when they got a good boss. And let's face it, I did 33 years in the FDNY. We both got over 30 something years in between volunteering, career, and everything else. Not almost every boss, but many, most of the bosses, most of the officers, most of the chiefs are all quality people who work hard and try hard. Some people have some deficiencies. Some people are a little weak on one thing or a little weak on another thing. But most guys and gals that are in the fire service and EMS and emergency services, most of them are dedicated people who want to do the right thing and have been well trained and mentored by the folks that came ahead of them. And so luckily we're in a good batch. We're in a good batch of people. We're in a good group. The fire service and emergency services attracts good people to start with. And then, when you get good mentors, and then when you follow, when you follow the example set by your bosses when you're a firefighter, or by your senior bosses when you're a young new company officer, you just get better and better and better. And like you've said, some of your mentors and mine, you're learning until you retire. The last day, the day before you retire, you pick up something new in the firehouse. You learn something new. So it's been a wonderful work experience to be in and still be in, the volunteers. And I just wish everybody else had the opportunity to work with such good bosses as we did.
Oh, I'm telling you. And again, we picked the title right at the beginning of the show. Great leaders make tough decisions. Every one of the people we were talking about, some we named, some we didn't name, were those kind of bosses that made those tough decisions when they need to be made. Just there it is. I mean, like I said, anybody can just come and show up. Good and to great bosses make those tough decisions and lead their people and keep them healthy and alive. Hey, buddy, we're at FDIC again this April, and they have us Monday for our listeners. They have us Monday from 1:30 to 5:30 in the hot workshops, the pre-conference workshops. John and I are teaching from 1:30 to 5:30 p.m. our Chief Officers Field Training Program. So if you're a battalion chief, a battalion commander, a district chief, a chief that runs calls, and even if you're volley, but everything adjusts. The only thing we'll tell you is sign up now. Start sign up now, because every year we've done this one. I think this is the third year, John. We fill the room when we do it, so make sure you sign up for that one. I'm going to be in the morning teaching for the Women in Fire, the incredible organization that we used, International Society of the whole women in the fire emergency services, now Women in Fire, a great group. I'll be teaching the small stuff in the morning for them, but John and I again will be in the afternoon doing our Chief Officers Field Training Program. Then on Friday, most likely, I think they're getting ready to schedule John for Friday. We'll be doing the 3 Degrees of Mayday again, and then we're going to be changing up probably our issues and challenges and having some fun with that maybe a little bit later in the day with another group. So that'll be fun. So FDIC is coming up in April, buddy. you've got a bunch of classes coming up. I do. We've got a bunch coming together next month. Next month we're in Georgia and Orlando for our Company Officers Academy, folks. There's still some seats. Get signed up now. Don't wait to the last minute. I post all of our classes on my prideandownership.com website calendar, that not just the ones I do, but the ones that John and I do together. So make sure you check that out. If you're looking to host a program, give either one of us a shout. Our contact information is on both of our websites. Pretty easy to find us. Or send us an email. John, what email would you want them to use if they want to get hold of you to teach?
My email is chiefjohnsalka@gmail.com.
And I'm chieflasky@gmail.com. So get a hold of us either way. If you want to host a Company Officer Academy or one of our Battalion Chief Academies, if you will, through us or CSU, Columbia Southern University, give us a holler. We'll get you rolled out there. We have some great shows. We've got some great fire engineering podcasts, the command post right here. Make sure you tune in and spread the word. Also catch our old school podcasts that John are doing. They're on iTunes as well. Again, we're both John website Chief John Salka or John Salka, johnsalka.com, right?
Chief John Salka.
Chief John Salka .com, and then you've got me at prideandownership.com. Hey, any closing thoughts, buddy?
That's a wrap, man. It's been good. We've been out of touch a little bit lately, but I'm glad we get to get this other one out there, and we get a couple more ideas that we're gonna nurture a little bit and have a few more.
Yeah, let us know what you think, folks. Give us a shout. We're always honored that you take the time to join us and listen in, whether you're working out or driving to or from the firehouse, from a job or whatever. We appreciate you. In closing, John and I always finish this show by asking you to please keep the men and women in our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. As well as right now, our brothers and sisters, again, in law enforcement are going through golly, man, some struggles. But, keep them in your thoughts and prayers. Remember, never forgetting means never forgetting. Be safe. God bless you. And thanks for tuning in and listening to us, okay?